Right, we all know the Explorer's shape. It's one of the most iconic silhouettes in heavy metal history. Pointy, aggressive, instantly recognisable. This guitar just screams metal, from Hetfield to Mastodon to countless modern bands. And for me, the Explorer will always be James Hetfield's guitar. No arguments. His white one from the 80s is basically burned into my brain. It's the ultimate riff rhythm machine. But here's the crazy part. Did you know the Explorer was actually a complete flop when it first released? Not just a flop, a complete disaster. Gibson's biggest failure. A guitar they basically couldn't even give away. So how did this futuristic dud go from being rejected in the 50s to becoming the defining guitar of thrash metal in the 80s, and still one of Gibson's most important designs today? Well, it comes down to one man, James Hetfield. Let's dig in. Back in 1958, Gibson were in trouble. Fender were dominating with their flashy new Stratocaster and their Telecaster, and players thought Gibson looked old-fashioned. Jazz boxes, Les Pauls, your dad's guitars basically. So Gibson's president Ted McCarty said, right, we need to look modern. He launched the so-called Modernistic series, the Flying V, the Mythical Modern, and the Explorer. And man, these guitars looked like spaceships compared to everything else that was on the market. They had sharp edges, futuristic angles, and they were built from Carina wood instead of mahogany. They were so far ahead of their time that people didn't even know what to do with them. And the sales numbers proved it. In 1958, Gibson shipped 434 Les Pauls. Explorers, 19. 19 guitars. That's not even a production run. That's a factory accident. The next year, they managed 3 more. 3! That's not limited edition. That's a clearance bin. By 1963, the Explorer was basically gone. Pulled from production, abandoned, forgotten. And the irony, today those original Carina Explorers are some of the rarest, most expensive guitars in the world. You want one now, you're paying hundreds of thousands, even millions at auctions. Back then, nobody wanted them. Maybe check your grandpa's attic for one. Fast forward to the 1970s. Music is heavier, music is louder, it's more aggressive. Hard rock and early heavy metal are basically exploding. And suddenly, these weird Explorers start reappearing. Alan Collins of Lynyrd Skynyrd was one of the first to make it his main guitar. On stage with Freebird waving around his futuristic shape, it started to look a little bit less ridiculous. Gibson noticed. In 1976 they reissued the Explorer, but even then it was still pretty niche, a curiosity more than a bestseller. And then came James Hetfield. In the early days of Metallica, Hetfield's main guitar was a white Electro Flying V copy, like this one. It was cheap, but it got the job done. The problem? The neck kept breaking. He repaired it, reinforced it, but eventually, mid-tour, it snapped beyond saving. Imagine that. You're leading the fastest rising thrash band in the world, and your only guitar just explodes. Hetfield needed a replacement, so he picked up a white 1984 Gibson Explorer. Not because it was famous, not because it had history, because he needed something solid, and this one looked tough enough. And that decision changed everything. The 84 Explorer he thought was a special version. Guardless, sleek, it was alpine white, it looked mean, and when Hetfield hit those first chords, it sounded massive. That guitar became his main rhythm weapon. He played it so hard, it basically started to look like it was relicked, covered in dings, scratches, gaffer tape, stickers. And then in 1986, the ultimate Hetfield move. He took a knife and he carved the words, "So what?" into the body. Not a sticker, not a decal, it was a scar. That wasn't customizing, that was basically declaring war. That single act fused the Explorer's image with Metallica's rebellious spirit. From then on, the Explorer wasn't just a guitar, it was a symbol. Now let's talk about why the Explorer worked so well for Hetfield. It wasn't just the look. This guitar is basically a tree trunk with strings, a giant slab of mahogany that gives huge sustain and a thick, beefy tone. With its relentless downpicking and palm muting, that Explorer delivered the tight, crushing chug that defined Ride the Lightning and Master of Puppets. When you hear that massive rhythm tone, that's the Explorer. By the And Justice for All era, Hetfield swapped the stock pickups for EMG 81 and EMG 60. That gave him an even tighter, more surgical sound. But the silhouette, that aggressive Explorer shape, never left his side. Here's where the story gets even more interesting. As Metallica blew up, Hetfield needed more Explorers. Backup guitars, tour guitars, customs. But Gibson weren't building him anything special. This is where ESP stepped in. They built him the MX220 and later the MX250. They were Explorer-style guitars with sharper horns and tougher builds. If you've ever seen Metallica live in the late 80s, you've seen those ESP Explorers. They became just as iconic as his original Gibson. ESP even made signature models based on them, like the Snakebyte today. Without Hetfield, ESP might never have become the giant that it is in the metal market. And then in the 90s, James wanted something truly unique. Enter luthier Ken Lawrence. Ken built him a series of custom Explorers. They had exotic woods, custom inlays, they were beautifully crafted. And yet, even with all the luxury, the core silhouette was still the Explorer, proving that after decades, Hetfield never walked away from the shape that basically defined him. The impact of this one guitarist on a failed design is almost impossible to overstate. Fans saw Hetfield with an Explorer, and they wanted one. I want one. Gibson, who couldn't sell 20 of them in the 50s, suddenly had a bestseller. ESP built an entire business of Explorer-style models because of James, and Ken Lawrence's customs show that even the most boutique, high-end builds are still showing honour to the Explorer silhouette. Today, the Explorer is a mainstay in Gibson's lineup. Modern reissues, special editions, artist models, all basically tracing back to the moment Hetfield grabbed that white 1984. Other players use them too, like Bill Kelleher from Mastodon. Matt Heafy even uses them now. Matt Tuck from Bullet for Valentine, and countless others. But no matter who plays one, the first name you'll think of is James Hetfield. So, the Gibson Explorer, a futuristic guitar, basically ahead of its time, a total commercial disaster. I didn't know this. And then, decades later, the defining shape of thrash metal. James Hetfield didn't just play the Explorer, he saved it. He gave Gibson's biggest flop a purpose, an identity, and a permanent place in heavy metal history. And that, my friends, is one of the greatest comeback stories in music gear history. Let me know what you thought in the comments. I didn't know any of this until I started researching it. I just always thought the Explorer was synonymous with James Hetfield because I'm such a huge fan of James Hetfield. But let's be honest, anyone in metal or metal adjacent music that plays an Explorer pretty much has to be because of James Hetfield. And don't forget to join me in the comments to talk about your favourite James Hetfield Explorer, and I'll tell you all about mine. Downpick or die.